They mocked him for being chubby until he revealed his secret and left them in shock. Have you ever been judged just by the way you look? Imagine that every step you take is followed by looks of disgust and whispers behind your back. That every attempt to be kind ends in other people's laughter. Now think, what if the person everyone underestimates is hiding a talent that could leave the entire world speechless? This is the story of Andrew, a man who was mercilessly humiliated for being chubby, until one day, he decided it was time to show everyone who he really was. What he did left his worst bullies begging for forgiveness and the rest fighting back tears. Get ready for a story of poetic justice, transformation, and silent revenge. Andrew had always been a quiet man, soft-spoken, polite, with a shy smile that would sneak out whenever someone said something kind to him. But in the small neighborhood where he lived, being different was almost a crime, and his crime was weighing more than what others considered acceptable. Every morning as he walked to work, the comments started before he even made it to the corner. "There goes the human drum," someone would shout from across the street. Others just laughed as he passed by, as if his very existence was a joke. Andrew did his best to ignore them. He kept his head down, adjusted his backpack over his shoulders, and kept walking like he didn't hear a thing. But inside, each word felt like a splinter digging deeper into his heart. The worst of them all was Raoul, the kind of man who thought he was the king of the neighborhood. Tall, muscular, with a smug grin he used like a weapon. He always managed to find the perfect moment to humiliate Andrew, whether it was at the store, at the bus stop, or even during neighborhood meetings. "Hope there's food left after he gets through," Raoul would shout, and the others would laugh as if it were the cleverest joke in the world. But what no one knew, what no one ever stopped to consider, was that Andrew was hiding something. Something that was about to change everything forever. As the weeks dragged on, the taunts only grew sharper, more vicious. It felt like Andrew couldn't step outside his house without becoming the target of someone's joke. The bakery, the corner store, the park. No place felt safe anymore. People who once greeted him politely now avoided eye contact, too afraid to be associated with the chubby guy everyone mocked. Andrew had never asked for attention. He lived a simple life, worked a regular job at a small hardware store, took care of his aging mother, and spent his evenings reading or watching old movies. But in the eyes of the neighborhood bullies, his quietness made him weak, and weakness to them was an open invitation for cruelty. One evening, after an exhausting shift at work, Andrew stopped by the grocery store. He just wanted to grab some ingredients to make dinner for his mum. As he walked through the aisles, pretending not to notice the snickers behind him, he heard Raoul's voice echo from the other end of the store. "Careful, folks! Big guy needs extra space on aisle 3. Raoul laughed loudly, slapping his friend on the back as they both looked straight at Andrew. The whole store turned to see what the commotion was about. Some laughed, others just shook their heads and looked away, pretending they hadn't heard. No one defended him. Not once. Andrew felt the familiar sting behind his eyes, the burn of holding back tears. He clenched his jaw, forced a smile, and kept walking, but inside something was shifting. The weight of humiliation had been crushing him for years, but in that moment, it stopped feeling heavy. It started feeling like fuel. Because the truth was, Andrew wasn't just enduring the insults, he was quietly, patiently waiting for the perfect moment. And that moment was coming soon. Andrew's quiet nature had always made him an easy target, but what his bullies didn't know was that beneath his calm exterior, he had been living a double life. Every evening, after cooking dinner for his mother and making sure she was comfortable, Andrew would head down to the small, dimly lit basement of their house. Down there, away from the judging eyes of the world, he transformed. For years, Andrew had been practicing martial arts, not for glory, not for competition, but for himself. It had started as a way to defend against the relentless bullying he faced as a teenager, but over time, it became his sanctuary. His body, which everyone mocked, was far stronger and more capable than anyone suspected. Hours of rigorous training had given him agility and power no one would ever expect from the chubby guy. But it wasn't just physical. Andrew also had an extraordinary talent for strategy and discipline. He studied movement, control, balance. While Raoul and his gang spent their nights drinking and bragging about themselves, Andrew was mastering skills most people only saw in movies. And yet he kept it all hidden. Why? Because Andrew didn't need applause. He didn't crave attention or praise. He was waiting for the right moment, the perfect opportunity to expose the truth, not through words, but through undeniable action. And that moment arrived sooner than anyone expected. One day, a flyer appeared in the neighborhood. Annual Community Obstacle Course Challenge, cash prize and local fame. Raoul, of course, couldn't resist signing up. Neither could his friends. They laughed, just imagining Andrew watching from the sidelines. But Andrew didn't plan to watch. This time, he would enter. And when he did, they'd finally see the man they thought they knew wasn't the man standing before them at all. The day Andrew signed up for the community obstacle course, the room fell silent for a split second, just long enough for people to exchange glances before the laughter exploded. "You're kidding, right?" Raoul sneered, slapping his friend on the back. "What are you gonna do, Andrew? Roll through the obstacles?" Andrew didn't flinch. He simply smiled, signed his name, and left without a word. The gossip spread like wildfire. The entire neighborhood buzzed with anticipation, not to see him win, but to witness what they assumed would be his ultimate humiliation. But Andrew had no intention of failing. For weeks leading up to the event, he trained harder than ever. Each night in his basement, he pushed his limits: burpees, sprints, pull-ups, balance drills. He reinforced the skills he'd quietly mastered over the years, and with each passing day, his body responded. He felt lighter, stronger, more focused, but more than anything, he felt free. Free from the weight of their words, free from the shadow of doubt, free from the chains of insecurity that had wrapped around him since childhood. This wasn't just about proving something to them anymore. It was about proving something to himself, that he didn't need anyone's approval to be worthy, that the person he had become in silence deserved to step into the light. And as the morning of the obstacle course arrived, with the sun rising over the neighborhood that had mocked him for so long, Andrew felt something unexpected: excitement, not for revenge, but for the moment they would finally see who he really was. And whether they liked it or not, they were about to witness a transformation no one saw coming. The crowd gathered early that morning, buzzing with anticipation. Families set up lawn chairs, kids ran around with snacks, and neighbors whispered predictions about who would take home the trophy. No one, absolutely no one, believed Andrew stood a chance. Raoul strutted around in his athletic gear, flexing and grinning as if the event had been designed just for him. "You ready to embarrass yourself, big man?" he called out, loud enough for the crowd to hear. The laughter that followed felt like a punch, but Andrew simply nodded. "Good luck," Andrew said softly, and that alone seemed to throw Raoul off for a moment. When the race began, it was chaos. People sprinted toward the first obstacle, a towering wall that required upper body strength to scale. Andrew approached it calmly. While others scrambled and struggled, he moved with surprising agility, gripping the ledges and pulling himself up with precise control. The murmurs started almost immediately. "Did you see that?" someone whispered. By the time they reached the rope climb, Raoul was already losing steam, sweat dripping down his face. Andrew, however, attacked the ropes like he'd done it 1,000 times. His hands, strengthened from years of martial arts and secret training, gripped the fibers with ease. In one fluid motion, he was over the top. Obstacle after obstacle, the impossible became reality. The man they mocked for years was dominating the entire event. By the halfway point, the crowd had fallen nearly silent. The laughter had died. The smirks were gone. All eyes were on Andrew, who moved with a quiet, focused determination. Raoul, panting and clearly overwhelmed, tried to keep up but couldn't hide the panic in his eyes. And as the final obstacle loomed, a massive mud-covered ramp, Andrew took a deep breath, sprinted forward, and with one final explosive push, launched himself over the top. He crossed the finish line. First, the crowd erupted, but it wasn't just cheering. It was shock, awe, respect. For years, they had reduced him to a joke, a nickname, a target. And in just under an hour, Andrew had dismantled every insult they'd ever thrown at him. But he didn't gloat. He didn't boast. He simply turned to Raoul, who was still struggling through the course, and gave him a nod. The kind of nod that said, "Now you know." And with that, the man they thought they knew became unforgettable. In the days following the race, the entire neighborhood felt different. Andrew couldn't step outside without someone stopping him. People who had never given him the time of day now greeted him with admiration. Strangers congratulated him. The same neighbors who once snickered behind his back were now eager to strike up conversations, hoping to be part of his story. And Raoul, well, Raoul had gone noticeably quiet. For the first time in years, his arrogant smirk was gone. He avoided eye contact whenever he crossed paths with Andrew. The man who had spent years tearing Andrew down now seemed unsure of how to even say hello. One afternoon, while Andrew was locking up the hardware store, Raoul approached. "Hey, Raoul started, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just wanted to say, good job. You really showed us." Andrew looked at him for a long moment. The old Andrew, the one who used to shrink away from confrontation, might have accepted the half-hearted compliment and moved on. But this Andrew had no interest in pretending it was all water under the bridge. "Thanks," Andrew said, his voice calm but firm. "But you didn't have to try so hard to tear me down back then, You guys acted like I was nothing. You treated me like I didn't matter." Raoul shuffled his feet, avoiding Andrew's gaze. I guess I didn't realize," Raoul mumbled. "You didn't want to realize," Andrew replied, "but now you do." And with that, Andrew walked away. Not out of anger, but because he understood something Raoul never would. True power isn't proving yourself to people who doubted you. It's knowing you never needed their approval in the first place. From that moment on, Raoul never mocked Andrew again. No one did. Because the man they'd all ridiculed had shown them exactly who he was, and they'd never forget it. After the race, Andrew's world didn't just change, it expanded. For the first time in his life, people listened when he spoke. They wanted to hear his story, how he trained, why he stayed so silent all those years. But Andrew wasn't interested in fame or attention. What truly mattered to him now was sharing the lesson he had learned the hard way. Never let someone else's opinion define your worth. Weeks later, the community center invited him to teach self-defense classes. At first, Andrew thought no one would show up, but the room was packed. People who had once ignored him now wanted to learn from him. Many of them admitted they, too, had been silently struggling with their weight, with self-esteem, with the fear of not belonging. Andrew didn't just train them physically. He taught them how to fight the voices that tell you you're not good enough. He taught them how to carry themselves with quiet confidence. One night, after class, a young man lingered behind. He looked nervous as he approached. "Andrew, how did you do it? How did you keep going when everyone laughed at you?" Andrew smiled, thinking back on those long, bitter years. "I stopped living for them," he said. "And I started living for me." That became his motto, his truth. And slowly, the man who had once been a joke to the entire neighborhood became its greatest inspiration. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need to humiliate anyone back. He won simply by becoming the version of himself he was always meant to be. And that, more than any race or obstacle course, was the real victory. What about you? Have you ever been underestimated, mocked for something beyond your control? Maybe it's time to stop living for the approval of people who will never see your worth and start becoming the person you were meant to be. Because when you do, the same people who doubted you won't know what hit them. What did you think of Andrew's story? Has something like this ever happened to you? Tell us in the comments below. And if this inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories just like this.